Right now, you probably feel like you are falling behind in life. You look at someone your age, making more money, getting better grades, or living a better lifestyle, and a deep, sinking feeling of failure hits your stomach. You feel a quiet, burning jealousy. You think this feeling is entirely natural. You think comparing yourself to others is just a fundamental part of human nature. But you are wrong. Imagine a world where it is physically and psychologically impossible to feel jealous. You cannot feel poor, you cannot feel like a failure, and you cannot feel like you are losing. Not because you have everything you could ever want, but because your brain literally lacks the software to understand the concept of having more than someone else. For 99% of human history, depression caused by comparison did not exist. Because to compare two things, you need a way to measure them. And for hundreds of thousands of years, humans did not have the words, the tools, or the desire to count their worth. This is not a boring history lesson. This is the dark, psychological story of how a single shift in human history created the concept of poverty, birthed human jealousy, and built the invisible matrix of pressure that is currently destroying your mental health. To understand how broken our modern brains are, we have to look back at how we lived for over 300,000 years. If you were born as an ancient hunter-gatherer, your reality was something modern humans cannot even comprehend. You lived in a small tribe of maybe 50 to 100 people. You were nomadic, meaning you moved constantly, following the weather and the animals. Because you were constantly walking, you could only own what you could carry. And because nobody could physically hoard heavy possessions, the concept of wealth simply did not exist. If a hunter killed a large animal, he didn't keep it for himself to become the richest man in the tribe. He couldn't. The meat would rot in a few days. So he shared it with everyone. In these ancient societies, sharing was not an act of charity. It was the ultimate survival strategy. If the tribe found food, everyone ate. If the tribe found nothing, everyone starved together. Anthropologists call these societies fiercely egalitarian. This means they did not just happen to be equal. They aggressively forced equality. If a hunter became too arrogant or started acting like he was better than the others, the tribe would use psychological tactics to bring his ego down. They would mock his catch, tell him the meat was too tough, or completely ignore his bragging. This was a biological defense mechanism to prevent anyone from thinking they were superior. In this world, the question of who has more was meaningless. Your brain was optimized purely for the present moment. You didn't count your days, you didn't count your calories, and you certainly didn't compare your value to the person sleeping next to you. You experienced life exactly as it was. You were mentally free. But humanity was about to make a fatal mistake. About 12,000 years ago, everything changed. The Ice Age ended, the climate warmed, and humans discovered something that would permanently rewrite human psychology. They discovered agriculture. Instead of chasing food, humans learned how to plant seeds. We stopped walking and started building permanent settlements. And for the very first time in the history of our entire species, we produced a surplus. We grew more wheat and barley than we could eat in a single day. This surplus was the single most dangerous thing to ever happen to the human mind. Because once you have extra food, you need a place to store it. So humans built granaries. And once you store food, someone might steal it. So humans built fences and walls. And once you have walls, you have to decide who belongs inside the walls and who is left outside. This was the exact geographical and historical moment that comparison was born. But how did they compare? Before agriculture, human language was mostly used for storytelling, hunting strategies, and social bonding. But suddenly, with granaries full of wheat, early leaders needed a way to keep track of their property. The very first written marks in human history were not beautiful poems or spiritual texts. They were accounting records. The ancient Sumerians invented writing and tally marks purely to count who owned what. Imagine the psychological shock of this era. For the very first time, a human being could look at a neighbor's granary, look at the clay tablets recording the harvest, and mathematically prove that the neighbor had more. He has 50 baskets of grain. I only have 10. This was the invention of poverty. Poverty is not naturally occurring in the wild. Poverty is the psychological and mathematical gap between what you have and what the person next to you has. But why did they start caring so much? Why did comparison turn into a brutal obsession? Because the rules of survival had changed. In the nomadic days, if a drought hit, you just walked to a new forest. But as a farmer tied to a piece of land, a bad harvest meant certain death. Having more was no longer just about ego. It was an absolute guarantee that your bloodline would survive the winter. Comparison became a biological alarm system. If you looked around the village and realized you had less grain, fewer animals, and less land than the others, your brain flooded your body with stress hormones. That stress was meant to force you to work harder, dig deeper irrigation trenches, and hoard more resources so your family wouldn't starve. This agricultural era birthed social classes: kings at the top, priests below them, merchants, and finally, the peasants. Your entire value as a human being was no longer tied to your courage, your kindness, or your contribution to the group. Your value was tied to a measurable, comparative number. And the cruelest part about numbers is that they are infinite. There is always a higher number, which meant, for the first time in human history, it was impossible to ever have enough. The psychological treadmill had been turned on, and humanity has been sprinting on it ever since. Which brings us to you, sitting here right now. You might be thinking, okay, so ancient Mesopotamian farmers compared their wheat. What does that have to do with my anxiety today? Everything. You see, human evolution is incredibly slow. The society we live in today is brand new, but the brain inside your skull is ancient. You are operating a highly complex digital world using hardware that was designed for small, primitive farming villages. According to evolutionary psychology, the human brain is hardwired to exist in a tribe of about 150 people. This is known as Dunbar's number. In an early settlement of 150 people, comparison was manageable. You only had to compete with a few people your own age. If you were the best blacksmith in your small town, you felt successful. If you had the best harvest in your neighborhood, you felt secure. But modern technology took this ancient survival mechanism and weaponized it on a global scale. Today, you are no longer comparing yourself to the 150 people in your local village. You are comparing yourself to 8 billion people on the internet. When you open social media, your primitive brain does not understand that it is looking at a highly curated, heavily edited, global highlight reel of the top 1% of humanity. Your brain processes this digital information exactly as if these people are members of your immediate tribe. You see someone your age driving a luxury car, traveling the world, and displaying massive wealth, and your ancient agricultural brain glitches. It looks at their surplus and compares it to yours. It sends a massive panic signal to your nervous system. You are at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. You have the lowest numbers. You are going to be left behind. We have gamified human existence. Every single aspect of your life has been reduced to a visible, countable metric that triggers your ancient survival fears. How popular are you? Check your follower count. How attractive are you? Check your likes. How smart are you? Check your academic scores. How successful are you? Check your bank balance. We are constantly wearing our tally marks on our foreheads. And because we are constantly measuring ourselves against the entire planet, we exist in a permanent state of psychological deficit. The modern system is specifically designed to make you feel like you are losing, because a person who feels like they have enough doesn't buy new luxury clothes to impress strangers. A person who feels enough doesn't work 60-hour weeks to buy things they don't need just to increase their perceived status. The entire modern economy relies entirely on your insecurity. It relies on the ancient curse of comparison. You are carrying the weight of a 12,000-year-old mathematical virus. The exhaustion you feel, the crippling anxiety about your future, the bitter sting of jealousy when you see someone else succeed. These are not character flaws. You are not a weak person. You are a biological organism trying to survive in a highly unnatural digital environment that forces you to constantly measure your right to exist. The next time you catch yourself feeling inferior because someone else has a higher number than you, whether it's their age, their money, or their followers, pause. Recognize that the number is an illusion. It is an artificial construct invented by early humans simply to count their wheat, which has now been turned into a weapon against your own self-worth. You cannot win a game that has no finish line. The only way to beat the system is to realize that the rules were made up thousands of years ago. You are not falling behind. You are just measuring your life with a ruler that was never meant to measure a human soul.